When people think about cultural problems, they usually point to politics, economics, or technology. Rarely do they mention aesthetics. Beauty is often treated as something secondary, something nice to have but not essential. Yet, how a society understands and cultivates beauty says a great deal about its overall health. Beauty is not simply decoration, it is a way of experiencing the world. For most of history, civilizations have taken beauty seriously. The Greeks devoted care to proportion and harmony in their temples, believing these forms reflected a deeper order in the universe. Medieval builders made cathedrals, not because such structures were efficient, but because they expressed a vision of human life reaching upward. In both cases, the presence of beauty signaled that the culture valued meaning, transcendence, and dignity. In the modern world, the situation is very different. Our cities are largely designed for efficiency and cost. Much of our art is created to shock or to sell. Our daily environment is filled with images and sounds intended to capture attention rather than inspire thought or reflection. The result is that many people live surrounded by what can only be called ugliness. As seen with the lack of grace in our buildings, restraint in our advertisements, music and entertainment that often value novelty more than depth. This condition raises important questions. What effect does constant exposure to ugliness have on individuals and societies? Is ugliness just a matter of personal taste, or does it carry objective consequences? Can we really claim that beauty is unnecessary when so many generations before us saw it as central to human flourishing? It is worth pausing to consider these questions carefully. Beauty may not feed the body, but it nourishes the imagination and the spirit. It gives shape to our sense of belonging and our ability to perceive meaning in the world. Without it, life becomes functional, but flat, also efficient, while uninspiring. Ugliness, by contrast, can dull our sensitivity to meaning, encouraging indifference where reverence might have been possible. To argue that ugliness has consequences is not to demand that everything look like a cathedral or a masterpiece. Rather, it is to suggest that the aesthetic dimension of life influences our attitudes in subtle but real ways. A classroom with natural light and thoughtful design encourages learning differently than one with fluorescent bulbs and cinder block walls. A neighborhood with welcoming architecture fosters community in a way that monotonous concrete towers rarely do. Environments teach us what to expect from life. The modern neglect of beauty, then, is not a small matter. When societies treat aesthetics as irrelevant, they risk creating spaces and experiences that reduce rather than enrich human life. Over time, this neglect can shape cultural attitudes, leading people to settle for less harmony, less aspiration, less meaning. Ugliness, in this sense, is not neutral. It subtly communicates that disorder and triviality are acceptable, and this message influences how people think and behave. In the moments that follow, we will explore what ugliness actually means, why it matters, and how it shapes both culture and individual experience. We will look at its presence in modern life, the ways it affects our perception of meaning, and what can be done to recover an appreciation for beauty. The goal is not nostalgia or romanticism, but clarity, to understand that the aesthetic dimension of life deserves attention, and that ignoring it carries consequences we often fail to recognize. Before we can talk about the consequences of ugliness, we need to be clear about what it actually means. Too often the word is used loosely, as if ugliness were nothing more than personal taste or a matter of fashion. But if we want to understand its cultural impact, we have to treat it with greater precision. Ugliness is not simply what I don't like. A person may dislike broccoli or jazz music, but that does not make either ugly. Dislike is subjective. Ugliness, by contrast, has to do with a breakdown of harmony, proportion, or coherence. It is the presence of disorder where order is expected, or the intrusion of what is trivial, vulgar, or distorted into a sphere where dignity and depth ought to appear. Consider architecture. A building can be simple and unadorned, yet still dignified and balanced. On the other hand, a structure that ignores proportion, overwhelms the senses with chaos, or feels cold and oppressive communicates a kind of ugliness that is not just about taste. The same can be said for music. A melody can be plain and still beautiful, while music designed only to shock, irritate, or trivialize human experience often leaves us with the sense that something is missing or misaligned. This distinction is important because it moves the discussion beyond preference. Ugliness can be identified by certain patterns: harshness that serves no end, imbalance that confuses rather than guides, and triviality in moments that demand care. A courtroom decorated like a carnival would not simply be unusual, it would be ugly because it betrays the meaning of the space. A work of art that mocks dignity or delights in vulgarity may be technically skilled, but if it undermines what should be respected, it bears an element of ugliness. We might also think of ugliness in terms of absence. Beauty often involves harmony, proportion, radiance, or integrity. When these are absent, or when their opposites dominate, we encounter ugliness. This can take many forms: monotony, distortion, chaos, or banality. Ugliness is not always grotesque. Sometimes it is simply the emptiness of design without thought or art without meaning. In everyday life, ugliness appears in countless ways. It can be a building that dominates a neighborhood without regard for its surroundings. It can be advertisements plastered across every surface, turning public space into a marketplace of distractions. It can be entertainment that relies on shock or vulgarity instead of insight or beauty. It can even appear in small details: a lack of care in design, a neglect of proportion, a preference for what is quick and cheap over what is thoughtful and lasting. Why does this matter? Because our environment shapes us. People internalize what they see every day. A city filled with order, variety, and beauty encourages citizens to value those qualities. A city filled with neglect, disorder, and visual noise teaches indifference. In this sense, ugliness is not just about appearances. It communicates a vision of the world, one that can either elevate or diminish. Understanding ugliness in this way helps us see why it is more than taste. It is a condition of disharmony that affects how we perceive meaning and value. And because humans are not indifferent to their surroundings, ugliness gradually leaves its mark on our attitudes, emotions, and even our sense of purpose. If beauty is a reminder that life has depth, order, and radiance, then ugliness is a suggestion that life is shallow, chaotic, or trivial. This contrast is not academic. It shapes how people build, how they create, and how they treat one another. To recognize ugliness as something real is to acknowledge that it has consequences. Once we understand ugliness as more than personal preference, we can begin to see how it affects culture as a whole. A society does not merely reflect its values in laws and institutions, it also reveals them in what it builds, what it celebrates, and what it finds acceptable in its public life. A culture filled with ugliness sends a message about what it believes, or no longer believes, about human dignity, purpose, and order. Throughout history, societies have expressed their identity through art and architecture. Temples, theaters, cathedrals, town squares, and even simple homes embodied a sense of proportion and care. These were not always masterpieces, but they carried with them the conviction that the aesthetic environment mattered. To walk through an ancient city was not only to see a place to live, but to sense what the people valued. In modern life, this connection has weakened. Our built environments often prioritize efficiency and cost over harmony and meaning. Urban planning is frequently reduced to traffic management and zoning, rather than an effort to cultivate a human-friendly space. Many public buildings are designed as utilitarian boxes rather than places with character or dignity. The result is that large portions of daily life are spent surrounded by structures that neither inspire nor elevate, but simply function. The spread of advertisements provides another example. Public space, which could be an opportunity for shared beauty or reflection, is often dominated by commercial images. Billboards, screens, and posters compete for attention, each louder than the last. The purpose is not to create harmony, but to capture the eye. Over time, this constant bombardment shapes our expectations. We grow accustomed to noise and distraction, and what was once considered intrusive becomes normal. Entertainment culture adds to the picture. While art once aimed to cultivate insight, depth, or transcendence, much of modern entertainment is built on the logic of stimulation. Films, television, and music often rely on speed, novelty, or shock rather than reflection or harmony. This is not to deny that meaningful works are still created, but the overall atmosphere leans toward the immediate and the superficial. In such a climate, ugliness frequently appears, not always in grotesque forms, but in the triviality and disposability of cultural products designed only to fill time. The consequences of these patterns are subtle but significant. A culture filled with ugliness gradually lowers its expectations. People begin to accept environments that are monotonous or hostile to human flourishing. Communities grow used to living among structures that do not inspire respect or care. The sense that public life should reflect shared values and aspirations weakens, replaced by the idea that as long as something functions, nothing more is required. This acceptance of ugliness also reflects deeper philosophical assumptions. A society that no longer believes in objective meaning or higher values will naturally neglect beauty. If all values are relative, then aesthetics becomes a matter of taste, and the pursuit of beauty is easily dismissed as unnecessary. In such a context, ugliness thrives because there is no shared standard to resist it. What matters is utility, novelty, or profit. Harmony and depth appear unnecessary. The result is a cultural atmosphere of indifference. People no longer expect public spaces to inspire them, nor do they expect art to offer insight. Instead, the focus shifts toward distraction and convenience. Beauty becomes the exception rather than the norm, something sought in rare moments rather than woven into daily life. Yet human beings are not unaffected by this shift. Living in a culture saturated with ugliness changes how we perceive ourselves and others. When our surroundings constantly communicate disorder or triviality, we internalize those messages. Respect for life, for community, and for dignity is harder to sustain when the environment does not reinforce it. It is worth imagining the alternative. A society that values beauty creates spaces that encourage care, reverence, and aspiration. Streets are designed not only for traffic, but for community. Public art invites reflection rather than distraction. Entertainment challenges the imagination instead of numbing it. Such a culture cultivates citizens who are more attentive, more hopeful, and more connected to one another. Ugliness in culture, then, is not a small matter of style. It reflects a weakening of standards and a turning away from meaning. More importantly, it actively shapes people's expectations, teaching them to settle for less. Over time, this settling erodes the very qualities that allow a culture to flourish. Beauty elevates, ugliness diminishes. And when ugliness becomes the cultural norm, the result is not only an unattractive environment, but a diminished vision of what human life can be. If ugliness in culture influences the atmosphere of public life, its impact on the individual is even more profound. Human beings are not passive observers of their environment. We are shaped by what we see, hear, and experience each day. The aesthetic character of our surroundings enters into our habits, emotions, and expectations. Over time, ugliness leaves a mark not only on taste, but on the very condition of the soul. To begin with, beauty has a unique power to awaken receptivity. When a person encounters a work of art, a piece of music, or even a landscape that is genuinely beautiful, there is often a sense of being called to attention. One becomes quiet, attentive, and aware of something greater than oneself. This experience encourages reverence, humility, and even gratitude. It reminds us that life contains meaning beyond immediate utility. Ugliness has the opposite effect. Instead of awakening receptivity, it tends to dull it. A person constantly exposed to environments that are harsh, monotonous, or trivial gradually becomes less attentive to nuance. The ability to notice harmony and depth weakens. Just as constant noise makes silence feel uncomfortable, constant ugliness makes beauty seem strange or unnecessary. Over time, this dulling of perception can become a form of spiritual fatigue. Another consequence of ugliness is the cultivation of coarseness. Beauty often elevates, drawing us toward what is noble or dignified. Ugliness, by contrast, encourages indifference or even cynicism. When daily life is filled with disorder or triviality, it becomes easier to treat life itself as disorderly or trivial. Respect for oneself and others declines when the surrounding environment communicates that nothing deserves reverence. Consider how children are affected by their environments. A child raised in a space filled with light, proportion, and care develops a sensitivity to these qualities. The same child raised in a setting of neglect and ugliness may never fully develop the habit of looking for harmony. This is not to say that beauty alone determines character, but it provides a foundation. It shapes expectations of what life should be. When ugliness dominates, that foundation is weakened, and the sense of dignity that beauty fosters is harder to cultivate. There is also a connection between ugliness and despair. Beauty has the power to comfort, to suggest that even in difficulty, life holds meaning. Many people have found strength simply by listening to music, walking in nature, or contemplating art. Ugliness, on the other hand, offers no such support. It reflects chaos or emptiness, reinforcing feelings of insignificance. In a world already burdened by stress and anxiety, ugliness deepens the sense of isolation. It is significant that throughout history, beauty has been closely associated with hope. Communities in times of hardship still built spaces of dignity and created music of depth. These acts were not indulgences, but affirmations that life is worth more than its difficulties. When beauty is absent, the capacity for such affirmation weakens. People lose a sense of direction, and the soul grows more vulnerable to apathy. The relationship between beauty and transcendence also deserves attention. Beauty often points beyond itself. A piece of music or a work of art can evoke a sense that reality is more meaningful than we first assume. This experience can open the imagination to truth, to goodness, and even to the possibility of the divine. Ugliness, by contrast, shuts down this openness. It closes off the horizon of meaning, confining attention to what is immediate and shallow. We can see this in the difference between environments designed with care and those designed only for efficiency. A library with thoughtful architecture encourages quiet reflection. A room lit by harsh fluorescent lights and surrounded by bare concrete walls discourages it. Both spaces may serve the same functional purpose, but their impact on the inner life is very different. The soul responds to these differences, whether we acknowledge it or not. To live surrounded by ugliness is to carry a burden one may not even recognize. It subtly shapes attitudes, weakens attentiveness, and reduces sensitivity to meaning. Over time, it can create a disposition that is restless, yet apathetic, and stimulated, yet unsatisfied. This is why ugliness is more than a matter of taste. It is a condition that influences the very texture of human life. Beauty, by contrast, nurtures the soul. It restores attentiveness, invites reflection, and opens horizons of meaning. It does not eliminate suffering, but it provides a way of bearing it with dignity. To neglect beauty and to tolerate ugliness is, in effect, to deprive the human soul of a vital source of nourishment. The dangers of ugliness, then, are not abstract. They appear in the erosion of sensitivity, in the rise of cynicism, and in the quiet despair that comes from living without reminders of meaning. just as a poor diet weakens the body, a poor aesthetic environment weakens the spirit. Recognizing this connection is the first step toward renewal. If ugliness affects both culture and the individual soul, we have to ask why it has become so widespread in modern life. The answer lies in a broader crisis of aesthetics. For much of history, societies shared a conviction that beauty was real and worth striving for. Today, that conviction has weakened. The result is a culture where beauty is often dismissed as irrelevant and ugliness is tolerated, even celebrated. One factor in this crisis is the triumph of utility over meaning. Modern societies tend to evaluate things by their efficiency, cost, or immediate usefulness. A building is judged by how many offices it can contain, not by whether it contributes to the dignity of the city. A piece of music is valued for how many streams it generates, not for its ability to move the listener. In this context, beauty appears unnecessary, or even wasteful. The goal becomes to produce quickly and cheaply, with little regard for harmony or proportion. Another factor is the influence of relativism. When people stop believing that beauty has objective qualities, aesthetics becomes a matter of taste. One person prefers one style, another prefers another, and no one is in a position to say that either has more merit. This perspective encourages tolerance of ugliness, because the very concept of ugliness loses meaning. If beauty is only preference, then ugliness cannot be more than the opposite preference. Standards dissolve, and what once would have been dismissed as trivial or vulgar is allowed to stand as equally valid. Modern art and design illustrate this trend. Much of the art world has shifted away from seeking beauty or harmony toward exploring novelty, irony, or shock. Instead of lifting the imagination, works often aim to provoke or unsettle. There is, of course, room for experimentation, and not all challenges to tradition are unworthy. Yet when the pursuit of beauty is abandoned altogether, the result is often fragmentation. Viewers are left not with a sense of meaning, but with confusion or indifference. Mass culture adds to this problem. The logic of entertainment and advertising prioritizes speed and attention above all else. Content is designed to grab the viewer instantly, even at the cost of depth or integrity. In such a climate, beauty struggles to compete. A carefully crafted symphony requires patience. A loud jingle delivers its effect in seconds. Over time, audiences grow accustomed to the quick and the superficial, and expectations shift. What was once considered ugly or shallow is normalized, and beauty begins to feel unfamiliar. Technology has accelerated this process. Digital media produces a flood of images and sounds, many of which are disposable. Algorithms encourage repetition of what attracts clicks rather than what nourishes the imagination. In this environment, beauty risks being drowned out by volume. The subtle, the harmonious, the reflective. These are overshadowed by what is immediate and loud. The crisis of aesthetics, then, is not only about art in the narrow sense. It concerns the way modern life as a whole approaches the question of meaning. Beauty is dismissed as subjective. Efficiency replaces harmony, and cultural production is driven by novelty and profit rather than depth. The result is an atmosphere where ugliness spreads with little resistance. This does not mean that beauty has disappeared altogether. Works of genuine dignity are still created, and individuals still seek out beauty in nature, music, and art. But these efforts exist against the grain of the larger culture, rather than being its foundation. That is the difference from earlier times, when beauty was assumed to be essential to human flourishing. The danger of the modern crisis is not only the presence of ugliness, but the loss of standards by which to recognize it. If people cannot distinguish between the beautiful and the ugly, they lose the ability to resist the spread of disorder. This loss is not inevitable, but recovering from it requires a renewed commitment to seeing beauty as more than preference. It requires the recognition that beauty, like truth and goodness, is a dimension of reality that deserves respect. So, now we know that ugliness carries consequences for culture and for the human soul. The question becomes, what can be done? The presence of ugliness in modern life is not inevitable. It is the result of choices about design, priorities, values, and education. This means that the situation can also be changed. The renewal of beauty is possible, but it requires a shift in how we think about the role of aesthetics in human life. The first step is to recover the conviction that beauty matters. Too often, beauty is treated as an ornament, something extra to consider only when practical needs have been met. Yet history shows that people in far more difficult conditions than our own still built spaces of dignity, wrote music of depth, and cultivated art of lasting value. They did so not because they had excess resources, but because they understood that beauty nourishes the spirit just as food nourishes the body. A society that takes beauty seriously is one that takes human dignity seriously. Education plays a central role in this renewal. Children should not only be taught facts and skills, but also introduced to beauty in literature, music, art, and nature. Exposure to beauty cultivates sensitivity and attentiveness, habits that support learning and character development. A school that values beauty in its environment and curriculum communicates to students that life is more than efficiency. It is meaningful and worth caring about. Without this education, future generations may grow accustomed to ugliness, never realizing that alternatives exist. Public life is another area where beauty can be restored. Architecture and urban planning need not be extravagant to be thoughtful. Simple buildings can be designed with proportion, light, and human scale in mind. Public spaces can be arranged to encourage community rather than isolation. Instead of filling every surface with advertisements, cities can create areas for art, reflection, or natural beauty. These choices communicate respect for citizens, reminding them that their daily environment deserves care. The arts also hold immense potential for renewal. When artists and musicians aim not only for novelty, but for harmony, depth, and integrity, they provide works that can sustain the human spirit. This does not mean returning to a single style or forbidding innovation. It means recognizing that art has a responsibility to contribute to meaning rather than undermine it. Works of beauty open horizons of understanding. They invite reflection and reverence. Supporting such works, whether through education, patronage, or community efforts, strengthens culture as a whole. On a personal level, cultivating beauty is within reach for anyone. It may begin with simple choices, seeking out music that uplifts rather than numbs, choosing books that enrich rather than merely distract, caring for the spaces we live in with an eye toward harmony. Even small acts of attention to beauty, flowers in a room, a well-set table, time spent in nature, remind us that life is more than utility. These practices train the imagination and nurture gratitude. Spiritual life, too, is deeply connected to beauty. Throughout history, religious traditions have seen beauty as a path to transcendence. Sacred music, architecture, and art were not luxuries, but integral expressions of faith. They communicated reverence and lifted the mind toward the divine. Recovering this sense of the sacred role of beauty can help communities resist the trivialization of worship and the flattening of meaning. Beauty in the service of reverence sustains not only faith, but also the broader culture. None of this is easy. It requires resisting the cultural pressures of efficiency, consumerism, and relativism. It means choosing to invest in what may not be immediately profitable, but is deeply valuable. Yet the rewards are significant. A society that renews its commitment to beauty fosters citizens who are more attentive, hopeful, and dignified. An individual who surrounds themselves with beauty becomes more capable of reverence, gratitude, and joy. The dangers of ugliness are real, but so are the possibilities of renewal. Beauty may not solve every social problem, but it strengthens the foundations on which solutions depend. It cultivates the habits of respect, attentiveness, and aspiration that make genuine community possible. Without beauty, life becomes flat and utilitarian. With it, life regains depth and meaning. In the end, the choice between beauty and ugliness is also a choice about what kind of life we want to lead and what kind of culture we want to build. Ugliness communicates that nothing deserves reverence, that life is trivial. Beauty communicates the opposite, that life is meaningful, ordered, and worthy of care. Recognizing this difference is the first step toward renewal. The path forward begins with simple acts of attention, noticing the beauty that still surrounds us, seeking it out, and creating it where we can. Each of these acts resists the spread of ugliness and contributes to the restoration of a culture that values meaning. In this way, beauty is not only a gift, but a responsibility. To choose beauty is to affirm life. To tolerate ugliness is to diminish it.